talk about Alexander here and Hellenism. Alexander is one of the few people that no matter where you go to school, no matter what kind of knowledge you have in history, no matter what country you're in, people have heard of Alexander the Great, right? In some form or fashion. And it's funny because you go, well, what connection do we have? I can see that everybody's really paying attention. I don't have to do this. But we know, I mean, look at our connection just right away. Where do we live? Alexandria, named after Alexander. Yes, it is. Alexandria is named after all the Alexandrias in some form or fashion are connected all the way back to Alexander's city in Egypt of Alexandria. So instantly we are connected to Alexander here. And it's kind of interesting. Now, Alexander, here he is. Definitely one of the greatest military minds. There's no doubt about that. He establishes a very large empire, initially as the king of Macedonia. Then he becomes the famous conqueror of Persia, and we'll get into that. This becomes the largest empire the world has ever seen. And he does this through his charismatic and ruthless attitude. But he's also brilliant and bloodthirsty, so he's a very controversial figure. And that's why we're doing that evidence analysis on him. Because, you know, and it's a big component of your grade, 150 points. And it's really because, you know, he is controversial. Whether or not he did all these great things or whether or not he was really a great leader or not, he definitely had some problems that without a doubt caused people to like say, you know, we're sad he's dead, but he kind of messed a lot of stuff up too, right? And his legacy didn't last because he didn't even live long enough because of his reckless lifestyle to really establish what he was trying to do. And so, you know, looking in that evidence analysis and making your argument for whether you think he was great or not is really interesting. You know, but the people that follow him have this very ferocious loyalty to him. At one point, he just crosses the desert because nobody else has ever done it, and a bunch of his people die, but he still pulls it off. And they're just like, okay, we'll follow you, dude, whatever you want to do, which is kind of crazy. He's trying to unite the rest of the world that we've talked about, the ancient Near East, with Greek culture, like had never been done before. So he spreads this Greek culture and starts this whole kind of new historical epoch known as the Hellenistic Age. And we get our whole second sections on that. But again, when you consider whether he was great or not, you have to consider like kind of his whole life. Now, Alexander was born in Macedonia, just north of Greece in 356 BC. His father was Philip II. His mother was Queen Olympias. Philip II's, you know, wife, Queen Olympias, is outright dangerous, honestly. She's kind of bananas. She really loves her son to the point where she'd basically do anything to make sure that he was in charge of anything, and we're going to kind of talk about that too. But when he goes and gets down to Greece, Alexander liked to claim that his father was actually Zeus, that he was like a demigod, right? Which kind of just shows like this kind of arrogance to some extent, but also this idea that his mother thought she was divinely blessed with Alexander, right? And that kind of, a lot of that came from his mother. Now, for his part, Philip is a pretty impressive military man himself. He turns Macedonia into a region that was forced to be reckoned with. Before that, it was kind of these squabbling tribes that would fight amongst themselves. The Greeks basically just consider them kind of savages to the north. There's not really a big threat. But when Persia invades Greece in 490, if you remember, they actually unite with Macedonia in order to get supplies and have you know some places to regroup and stuff like that. But they don't really do much else with them. So they were a majorly underrepresented people in the historical narrative up to this point. And so Philip II unites these feuding groups, these nobles, into a full-on kingdom. He's a very impressive man on his own. And then he has these dreams of conquering Persia, but he never really gets around to it because he's eventually assassinated at a wedding. Interesting story there. Now, there's a lot of conspiracies about, you know, who done that, you know, exactly like who done it, who killed Philip, you know, and they know who actually like killed him, but there's some controversy as to why he killed him. And it's some pretty, decent speculation, honestly. But one of the thoughts was that Alexander's mother, Queen Olympias, actually paid somebody to kill Philip because Philip had, the word had gotten out that Philip was actually going to pass the throne to one of his generals, not to Alexander. And so his mom may have killed his dad, had his dad killed in order to make sure that before, he announced that Alexander wouldn't get the throne, he couldn't. Pretty interesting. But again, Philip's kind of an actual, formidable leader. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Here we have a Greek coin known as a Philippine coin. Because it's got Philip as king of Greece on it. So it's kind of neat that we have a coin that's clearly from his reign. We also think that we actually found Philip's tomb a few years ago. We don't know that this was his tomb, but the stuff that was in it, all these gold things, they really aren't, common for Macedonian burials. So this really does kind of show some really elite status that would have been bestowed upon this tomb. So we can't 100% confirm that it was Philip II's tomb, but we're pretty sure that it was. Really kind of interesting. Now, that takes us all the way to Alexander the Great. We're going to go back in time to when he was 12, actually, to kind of show the kind of character that he was in terms of courage, because at the age of 12, he goes out into the wilderness and finds this white horse, this horse that is wild, of just a crazy wild stallion. And he names it Bucephalus, and he takes Bucephalus home and tames him at 12. He breaks a wild stallion at 12 years old, which is not easy to do. It's hard enough to break a horse for saddle that has been raised in captivity to some extent, right? Like, much less a wild stallion. This dude, they're like, oh, this is the craziest horse. It's a massive horse. We're just going to have to put this horse down. Alexander says, I'll break him. They're like, dude, this is going to kill you. We can't let this happen. Alexander breaks it. He says, I'm brave enough to do this. I'll do it. And he does. And he basically becomes his companion for the rest of his life.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Like it actually is true?
Yeah.
Sounds like some story they made.
No.
How do they know it's just written somewhere?
Yeah, multiple sources talk about him taming the horse. It's a historically accepted truth. Remember, we're past Thucydides here. People that are writing histories are kind of trying to write down things that are real. Bucephalus is an enormous, ferocious stallion. He tames him at 12. And, in the Macedonian world, in the ancient world, this deed of valor at this very young age kind of shows this very impressive, attitude. It's kind of his, coming out party, of I'm strong, I can do amazing things. So then, a year later, Philip recognizes some of his traits, and he realizes his son is special. He realizes he needs to train him up so that he can take over one day. He's got this ruthlessness, this bravery, this courage, but he's also brilliant. And so he decides he's going to hire him a private tutor. And Philip was really obsessed with Greek culture, so he goes and gets the best Greek tutor that he can, Aristotle. The Aristotle. That's his private tutor. Alexander's personal teacher was the great Greek philosopher Aristotle. So, Alex kind of gets this interest in literature and science and medicine and math and philosophy, and all these things really drive Alexander to learn more. They develop this really strong partnership throughout his life, because he has to do all these things if he's going to be great. And part of being great is knowing all these other things. So certainly when it comes to military tactics and knowledge, Alexander is there. He's great. When he's 18 years old, when he's 16, Philip goes to battle and leaves his son in charge. And then when he's 18, Alexander sees an opportunity to prove his military might. And so he takes a cavalry unit and he goes and against a group of troops that are kind of outcast, like former immortals from the Persian Empire, stuff like that, called the Sacred Band of Thieves. And the Sacred Band of Thieves are supposedly, this alliance that is undefeatable. They're kind of unbeatable. And at the age of 18, he takes a cavalry unit and with really good military tactics, defeats the sacred band of thieves, wipes them out at 18 years old. So very much valorous. And then in 336, when he is, you can see here, this is when his reign kind of starts. His father is assassinated. And we know the man that assassinated him was called Croesus. And there's a conspiracy about, why does Croesus assassinate Philip II at this wedding? But it doesn't matter because they arrest him and Alexander and his mother kill him immediately before any evidence or questioning can be done. Dead. They're like, well, why did he do that? Well, we'll never know, I guess. Alexander's king now. The end, right? So it's kind of a weird kind of thing. And so basically, it looks very suspicious, but Alexander claims the Macedonian throne. And also now people in Greece, he looks at them and he says, hey, we're going to go conquer the rest of Greece. And he does that in pretty short order. And once he's kind of cleaned up and cleaned house, he's able to take up the grand ambitions of his father Philip, which is to go and conquer Persia. So at the age of 20, in 330 BC, he leads 37,000 troops into the Persian Empire, and which is really impressive. He's conquered Greece already, and he goes, now I'm 20 years old, I might as well go conquer the biggest empire that's ever existed at 20. And that's pretty much what he does. It's pretty impressive. 3 years later, he defeats Darius in combat and conquers the Persian Empire, which is kind of what we're going to go into detail, which is nuts. He's 23 years old, and he's the king of the world. Obviously, if you overthrow the previously largest empire and add to it, you're now the biggest empire. And then he eventually marches all the way to India, gets to the Indus River, and his troops are kind of like, dude, we've been campaigning for 10 years. I want to go home. They kind of mutiny against him, and he says, fine, we'll go home. But by the time he gets back, he's only home for about a year before he dies in 333, or 323. So this all lasts about 13 years, and then it's over, which is kind of crazy. And we'll talk more about his death here in a little bit. But this is kind of a map of his conquests. The two that we're going to really focus on here, we have the Battle of Issus here, and then the Battle of Gaugamela here in the middle here at the top. Now the Battle of Issus, Alexander faces off with Darius III. So this is the third Darius. And it's a pretty massive Persian army. They're definitely outnumbering Alexander. Alexander doesn't really care. But if you look at it, it's here in kind of southern Turkey. And those, again, his men are far outnumbered, but they're not nearly as experienced as they would be. But still, it doesn't really matter because Alexander is such a great military mind that he's basically going to take over. And so, this kind of shows that he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. Now, he does this very cleverly. Now, I want you to remember, he's already conquered Greece. He's used basically the same tactics in all of his conquering so far. And the Persians line up, and he ends up using the Gulf to fight the Persians. So you've got the Macedonians in blue with Alexander here, the Persian and Darius here in the middle. And his main move is he's going to line up on the right, break through the formation, and then trap you with the rest of his army. That's his move, all right? And so one of the mercenaries that Darius has fighting for him in Ionia is Greek. And this Greek mercenary has seen Alexander do this over and over. And he goes to Darius, he says, hey, dude, look, I want to let you know, I know what he's going to do. He's going to line up on the right, so why don't you put me and my guys who have seen this happen before over on your left side over here, right? Instead of in the middle, put us over here. We'll go up against Alexander. I'll defeat him for you because I know what he's going to do. Darius looks at him and he's like, dude, nobody is going to defeat Alexander except me. I'm going to get the glory for that. I don't need your advice. The guy basically walks off, according to sources close to the Persians, and the Greek guy is something like, oh, stupid Persian. You're too proud anyways. You're going to get your butt kicked. Well, Darius hears him. Darius speaks Greek, hears him, has the dude executed. Well, that guy's fighters are like, well, we're not going into battle without our leader. We've seen Alexander fight. We're not going into battle. Darius expels them and then starts the battle. Well, Alexander does exactly what that guy told him he was going to do. And he breaks through and he splits the line. This group over here, he doesn't worry about them. They're going to get defeated. And then he basically swings around, pushes Darius's forces into the sea, and traps them there, right? Now, Darius basically is forced to flee. Alexander continues to take more cities along the coast. Darius begs for peace, basically. Well, actually, part of the story here is that when Darius leaves, he leaves so fast, like his family that he brought with him for the campaign, like some of his wives and daughters, he like abandons them. And so Alexander like comes upon this tent that's like the royal tent with Darius' family in there, and he tells all his troops, he's like, don't touch a hair on their head. Don't touch them, don't do anything. And he writes to Darius, he's like, hey Darius, I got your family, just wanted to let you know. Darius is like, wow, I've got lots of family, but those were some of my favorite wives and daughters. Can I have them back? And Alexander tells him, well, sure, you can have them back, but it's going to cost you your empire. You have to surrender to me. It's going to cost you your empire. And Darius is like, well, I mean, I've got more family. I'll tell you what, I really like them. I'll give you half my empire. I'll give you half if you give me my wives and daughters back. And Alexander's like, in one of the most gangster moves of all of history, sends a letter and says, Darius, I already have half your empire. You can't give me something I already have. I want the other half. And Darius is like, no. And then he flees. He just takes off. And so it's pretty funny because Alexander's like, dude, I don't need you to give me something I already took from you. Okay, I want the other half. I want you gone forever. So it's pretty funny. He goes on down the coast into Egypt, which is really, really important. He goes to the oracle at Siwa, which is, kind of a very important place. That's where the army of Cambyses, tried to punish the oracle for claiming gloom and doom, and then they get buried. But he takes a very different approach. Remember, the Egyptians don't like foreigners taking over, but when he gets to Egypt, he says, no, I'm one of you, right? I worship Amun-Ra too. In fact, he has these coins made. So this is Alexander with his curly hair. And if you look here, this is a ram's horn. So he makes these coins and he starts handing them out to the Egyptians with his face on it. And it's got a ram's horn on it. Why? Yeah, because Amun-Ra had a ram's head. And so he basically says, I'm a descendant of Amun-Ra. You should accept me. So he told the Greeks, I'm a descendant of Zeus, right? I'm on your team. He tells the Egyptians, I'm a descendant of Amun-Ra. And it's kind of the same, kind of politically savvy move that he does here. And the Egyptians kind of say, well, you know what? Okay. And so he puts his name on a lot of stuff. He kind of basically pretends to be Pharaoh, essentially. And the Egyptians don't rebel. It's really important because basically Egypt is kind of the breadbasket. And so once he gets kind of the Egyptian food going, he stays there for a couple of years to kind of cement his power and make sure that the supplies are going to keep flowing. And then he goes on to conquer the rest of Persia, and he does this at the Battle of Gaugamela. Now, this time, Darius chooses the land. And so, the first time at Issus, Alexander picks the land that they're going to fight there on the coast. This time, Darius is waiting for him. He says, hey, I'm right here. Alexander goes right up to him, and he drives. Again, the Persians had this huge numerical advantage, and so you look here, you have this huge advantage, and Alexander is going to face him. So Alexander, what kind of strategy do you think Alexander's going to do? Same one. He's going to kind of come up, and so Darius tries this little pinch move. So Darius has brought a much larger force of cavalry. He's going to make this huge charge initially. And so Alexander is like, oh, okay, if you're going to charge, I'm just going to basically like hide some of my troops back here, the rear phalanx, and when your cavalry charges, I'm just going to be like, ole, and split, and just let you just charge right through, and then you've got this huge cavalry force that now, because I've got this huge auxiliary force in the back, I'm just going to surround you. Your huge cavalry that you thought was going to be this big thing, I'm just going to let you ride through, and then I'm going to close in around you and defeat your flank there. So then he's wiped out a huge portion of the cavalry, right? And then what does Alexander do? Breaks through the right side, just like he always does, once he's kind of leveled the playing field, and pins Darius' troop. Once again, Darius is going to flee because he's a little chicken, but one of his bodyguards actually executes him, kills Darius. And Darius' bodyguard goes to Alexander and says, hey, Alexander, the battle's over. Great job. I killed Darius for you. Aren't you so proud of me? Yay, me. What's my reward? And Alexander's like, seize that man, right? And has him tortured and killed. And everybody's like, why'd you do that? And he tells him, he's like, only kings are allowed to kill other kings. Basically, like, this guy was just a nobody. Nobodies don't kill kings. Kings kill kings. So at the end of the day, now Alexander's kind of the king of the world. There is another Persian leader that kind of steps up before Alexander gets all the way to Babylon called Besus. And, Alexander, goes in and puts him down very quickly. And actually, Besus' troops hand him over to Alexander because they're like, we don't want to mess with that dude. Alexander's bad to the bone. We're not fighting him. And this is kind of a battle of Gaugamela, This map is really interesting because it kind of shows how this happens in stages. The purple stage is kind of the initial phase. We have the Battle of Issus, and then the yellow stage, you have kind of the Battle of Gaugamela. And then the third stage is kind of the last, like him just basically wandering through the dadgum wilderness. He gets all the way to the Indus River and turns around. He's forced to turn around and go back home. Now, Alexander's empire, he does this in the name of the Greeks and the Macedonians, but it looks remarkably Persian. Okay, as for all these brilliant strategies that Alexander has, he dies really young, way too young for us to know how he would have been as a ruler. At 33, he's dead, and he's still using the Persian system of satrapies, which is a good idea, but he uses Macedonian governors instead of the Persians, and he's pretty much convinced that he's conquered the entire inhabited world. Of course, that that's not true. There's still more of India and China that's still going on at the time, further east. But he puts prominent Greeks and Macedonians in high places in each of these cities. And these are very rough guys. They live a pretty rough lifestyle. Alexander is a partier, for sure. He gets injured in battle several times. At one point, I think he got stabbed in the chest, and that never really healed up all the way. So he had this major drinking problem. He partied hard. He had, probably cirrhosis of the liver from this partying lifestyle. He was really a party animal. At one point, he actually set fire to part of Babylon while he was drunk. And then when he wakes up, he realizes he burned half the city down, and he felt really, really bad about it. He cried about it for 3 days. He's like, what did I do? And they were like, dude, you were going nuts. You were just setting fire to stuff. You were smashed. He was like, oh, I can't believe it. I'm such a terrible king. They were like, no, dude, it was crazy, dude. And so, really fascinating figure, but he ends up dying really, really early. And so, now he's dead. What's going to happen? What's going to happen with his legacy? And it's really kind of crazy because of all the great things he did, it all falls apart really quickly because he had no kids, no heirs, and it basically just becomes a free-for-all for his kingdom. So that's kind of going to leave us at the end here.